Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the English Over Tea podcast. I'm your host, Anna, and today we are diving into a topic that I know many of you struggle with. And honestly, even native speakers find it interesting once you pull back the curtain. We're talking about the absolute best way to improve your English vocabulary.
Hey, Anna, I'm really excited for this one. I talk to a lot of English learners, and the number one thing they ask me is, Dan, how can I learn more words faster? Most of them have these giant notebooks filled with lists of words and their translations. They think that if they just memorize the dictionary, they'll be fluent.
Exactly, Dan. It's a very common trap. Many learners think the best way to improve their vocabulary is simply to learn the definitions of as many words as possible. They treat it like a data entry job. Word goes in, definition goes in, move to the next one. But honestly, that isn't necessarily the best way to improve. If you want to actually use the language naturally, you have to go deeper. The real secret is to fully know a word.
Fully knowing a word. That sounds a bit more complicated than just checking a dictionary. What does that actually mean for a beginner?
It's actually a three-part system. To truly know a word, we must know its form, its meaning, and its usage. If you only have the meaning, you're missing 2/3 of the puzzle. Today, we're going to spend some time looking at that first part, the form of a word.
Okay, so when we say form, what are we actually looking at? Is it just how the word is spelled?
Spelling is part of it, but the form of a word is much broader. It relates to how the word sounds, how it is written, and what its individual parts are. Think of it like a physical object. You need to know what it looks like, what it sounds like when it hits the floor, and how it's built.
I love that analogy. Let's start with the sound. Why is knowing the sound of a word so important?
Well, knowing the sound of a word includes being able to recognize it when someone else says it, and just as importantly, being able to say it correctly yourself. But here's where it gets tricky for beginners. Words don't always sound the way they look on paper. You have to understand the individual sounds, but also how those sounds might change when people are speaking at a natural, quick speed.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean. We get lazy with our sounds in English, don't we?
We really do. Let's look at a classic example. If I say the sentence, "It's nice to meet you," on paper, meet ends with a T and you starts with a Y. But when people say this at a natural speed, they often make a ch sound at the end of meet and the beginning of you. It sounds more like meet you.
Right, and the spelling doesn't suggest that ch sound at all. If a learner is only looking for a T sound and a Y sound, they might get totally lost.
Precisely. Now, the good news is this sound change doesn't actually change the meaning of the words. Meet you still means meet you. However, if you're not aware of this form change in spoken English, it can cause you a lot of trouble when you're trying to understand a conversation in the real world.
That's a great tip. So sound is the first part of form. What else should we be looking for?
Another huge part of a word's form in English is stress. This is something that many languages don't use the same way English does. In English, stress is incredibly important to the sound of a word, and it can even decide what the word actually is, like whether it's a noun or a verb.
Wait, so the same letters can be two different words just based on which part I say louder?
Exactly. Let's take the word spelled record. If we stress the first part of the word, record, it's a noun, like a world record or a vinyl record. But if we shift that stress to the second part, record, it becomes a verb, to record a video or a song.
That is wild. It looks like one word on the page, but because of the form, the stress, it's really two different parts of speech.
Exactly, and that is a key part of knowing what form a word takes. If you just memorize the definition of record, you might get confused when someone uses it as a verb with a different pronunciation.
Okay, so we have sounds and stress. What's the third part of a word's form?
The third part is understanding the building blocks or the parts of a word. To really master the form, it's important to recognize the root word as well as any prefixes or suffixes.
For our beginners out there, can you remind us what prefixes and suffixes are?
Of course, these are just added beginnings or endings that we attach to a root or base word. When we add them, they change the meaning of that root. If you recognize the parts, you can often figure out a new word without a dictionary.
Can you give us an example?
Sure, take the word addition. If you look at the form, you can recognize the verb to add as the root. Then you see the suffix tion, which usually suggests a state or an action. Or look at the word untrue. You recognize the base word true and the prefix un, which means not.
So if I know true means something is correct, and I know un means not, I don't need to look up untrue. I can just see the form and know it means not true.
Exactly. When we look at English words this way, by their sounds, their stress, and their parts, we can see that our vocabulary expands much faster because we truly understand the word's form. As we saw with record, the same spelling can even work as two different parts of speech.
This is such a better way to learn than just staring at a list of definitions. It makes the language feel more like a puzzle you can solve.
It really does. And remember, this is just the first step. To really know a word, we need form, meaning, and usage. We've covered the physical body of the word, the form, but there is so much more to talk about regarding what these words actually represent and how they behave in a sentence. We've already explored the form of a word, which is like understanding the physical shape and sound of the language. But now we need to move into something that many learners find even more challenging, the meaning.
Now, Anna, I have to be honest. When I first started learning a second language, I thought meaning was the easiest part. You just take the English word, translate it into your native language, or you open a dictionary and read the first definition you see. Isn't that enough?
It certainly seems easy when you put it that way, but unfortunately for anyone wanting to fully know a word in English, one single definition is often not enough. English is a very flexible language, and its words are famous for having more than one definition, depending on the context they're used in.
I've noticed that. Sometimes I'll see a word I think I know perfectly well, but then I see it in a sentence where it makes absolutely no sense based on my dictionary definition.
That happens all the time because of how versatile English words are. Let's take a very common word as an example, the word run. Most beginners learn this word very early on. Dan, if I gave you 4 different sentences using the word run, would they all mean the same thing?
I doubt it. Let's hear them.
Okay, here they are. Number 1, I'm going to run to the shop. Number 2, she runs the local bakery. Number 3, water was running down the table. And number 4, all the papers are running the story.
Wow, okay. When you put them all together like that, you realize how different they actually are. In the first one, run is clearly about moving your legs quickly. If you look up run in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the first definition you'll find is to go faster than a walk.
Exactly. That definition works perfectly for the first sentence. But what about the other 3? If you try to imagine a bakery or water going faster than a walk, the image in your head becomes very strange.
Right. In the second sentence, she runs the local bakery, it doesn't mean she is jogging through the store. It means she is the person who operates, manages, or owns the shop.
Correct. And in the third example, water was running down the table, we could easily substitute it with another word. We could say the water was flowing down the table.
And that fourth one about the newspapers, all the papers are running the story, that sounds like the story is moving, but what it really means is that the newspapers are publishing the story.
Spot on. This is why relying on a single translation or the very first definition in a dictionary can be so limiting. To truly understand a word's meaning, you have to look at the different ways it interacts with the world. But it actually goes even deeper than just multiple definitions.
Deeper, what else is there besides the definition?
We also have to know the specific ideas or feelings that a word suggests to fully understand its meaning. Sometimes two words might have the same basic definition, but they feel different to a native speaker.
Can you give us an example of that? I think that's something beginners really struggle to feel.
Let's look back at our first example with the word run. I'm going to run to the shop. Now compare that to this sentence. I'm going to go to the shop.
Okay, they both mean the person is heading to the store.
True, but there is a subtle difference in the meaning we take away from it. The second example simply states a fact. You are going to the shop. But by choosing the word run, you are telling the listener that the trip will be fast. You're adding a feeling of speed or urgency that the word go doesn't have.
So even if the action is the same, getting to the store, the specific word choice changes the flavor of the sentence.
Precisely. When we look at English words in this way, we can see that our vocabulary expands by fully understanding a word's meaning, not just the surface level definition, but the nuances, the different contexts, and the feelings attached to it.
This explains why sometimes I try to swap a word for another word that I think is a synonym and a native speaker looks at me a bit confused.
That is exactly the point. We cannot just swap words without potentially changing the overall meaning of the sentence. Even if a dictionary says two words are the same, they often behave very differently in real life.
So if I can't just swap words, how do I know which one to use?
That leads us directly into our next big topic. We've covered form, and now we've looked at the layers of meaning, but the final piece of the puzzle is usage. Next, we need to take a look at synonyms, words that have the same or nearly the same meaning, and why they aren't always interchangeable.
I'm looking forward to that. It sounds like understanding usage is what separates a student who knows words from a speaker who knows how to communicate.
You hit the nail on the head, Dan. Understanding how the word is normally used is the final step in truly knowing a word. We need to look at things like formality and how certain words just seem to stick to others while their synonyms do not. It's all part of making your English sound more natural and less like a translated textbook. We have already discussed how a word's form and its many layers of meaning are essential to building a strong vocabulary. But there is one final piece of the puzzle that often trips up even the most dedicated students. To fully know a word, you have to know how it is normally used in everyday English.
This is the part where things get really interesting, isn't it? I've noticed that even if I know the definition of a word, I sometimes use it in a way that makes native speakers tilt their heads. It's like I'm using the right logic, but the wrong habit.
That is exactly what usage is. It's the habit of the language. A big part of usage involves synonyms, which are words that have the same or nearly the same meaning. Many learners assume that if two words are synonyms, they can be swapped out like batteries in a remote control. But in English, that often isn't the case. They frequently have different usages.
Can we look at a specific example? I think big and large are the ones I see beginners confuse the most. They both describe size, right?
Exactly. Both big and large are used to talk about the size of something, but their usage depends on the situation. Generally speaking, big is the word we use most often in casual conversation. Large, on the other hand, is a bit more formal.
So if I'm just hanging out with friends, I'd probably say, John is standing next to the big tree.
Right, it feels natural and conversational. But if you were reading a news report or a more formal description, you might hear, the large tree fell on the house.
That makes sense. It's about the vibe of the conversation. But are there times when you physically cannot swap them?
Definitely. This is where usage becomes a strict rule rather than just a suggestion. We use the word big specifically when we want to talk about someone or something that is important. For example, you would say, "This is a big decision." You wouldn't really say, "This is a large decision." It just doesn't carry that same weight of importance.
Oh, I see. And what about large? Does it have its own special territory?
It does. We tend to use large when we are talking about an actual amount of something. For instance, the company received a large number of complaints. Using big there might sound okay, but large is the standard way to describe a quantity. And of course, there's the most common place you see it, clothing.
Right. You never go into a store and ask for a big shirt. You ask for a large. It's a specific clothing size that sits right above small and medium.
Exactly. If you just learn the definition of great size, you might make the mistake of asking for a big shirt. And while the clerk would understand you, it wouldn't sound natural. This leads us to another very important concept for all, collocations.
Collocations. That's a fancy word. What does that mean for a beginner?
It's actually a very simple idea. Collocations are just words that naturally go together. Some words have a best friend word that they always hang out with, but their synonyms might not be invited to the party.
So even if the meaning is the same, the partnership between the words is what matters.
Precisely. Let's look at the word surprise. In English, we say big surprise all the time. However, we almost never say large surprise. Even though large and big are synonyms, large just doesn't collocate with surprise.
That's such a great way to think about it. It's like the words have a social life. Are there other examples of this?
Plenty. Think about the words unhappy and sad. They're classic synonyms. But we often say someone had an unhappy childhood. If you said they had a sad childhood, it's not grammatically wrong, but it just doesn't sound as natural to a native ear as the collocation unhappy childhood.
This really changes how I look at my vocabulary list. Instead of just writing down large equals big, I should be writing down the phrases they actually live in.
That is the best way to improve. When you look at English words through this lens, you can see that your vocabulary really expands by understanding the usage, not just the definition. By learning which words pair together, you start to sound less like you're translating in your head and more like a fluent speaker.
It sounds like the triple threat of vocabulary learning: form, meaning, and usage.
Exactly, Dan. If you want to truly improve your vocabulary, stop just memorizing definitions. Start knowing the word, how it sounds and is built, its form, the different ideas and feelings it carries, its meaning, and the specific way it behaves with other words, its usage.
This has been such an eye-opener. I think I'm going to go back and look at my word lists and see which ones I only know halfway.
That's a great plan. Once you start looking at words this way, you'll see them everywhere. Thank you all for joining us today on the English Over Tea podcast. We hope this helps you on your journey to becoming a more confident English speaker. Keep practicing, keep listening, and we will talk to you next time.